Okay.
All right. So today we're going to talk to David Harper, longtime English dealer. He's got his own channel on YouTube. I'm going to put a link down below. He's got a big affiliation, a bigger following on the BBC. He does regular episodes on there about antiques, traveling about the countryside, attending auctions, and telling people what he found, what he saw, and some very good interviews. And he knows a great deal. He's an old hand in the business. And this is David. We did an interview last week where he talked with me, and you can check that on his channel. And this is obviously on mine, and I do suggest you all go over there and subscribe to him and take a good look. And he fills in the blanks very often during the course of his videos on how things really work in this business. Welcome, David.
Peter, what a delight. Great to see you again. Wonderful to be on your channel.
No, it was fun. It was fun. Everybody's got some very positive comments from people, and I've gotten a few emails from people saying, "Oh, that was fun." And quite a few of them are already subscribers. There aren't many channels on YouTube that really focus on antiques per se. So I think when you find one, you want to keep track of it so you can stay in the loop, so to speak.
Do you think we're in early, Peter? Are we on YouTube early with the world of antiques and art?
Oh, I hope so. I hope we're on the cutting edge.
How long is it going to take?
I don't know. It's a slow burn, you know. I've been doing them for 6 or 7 years, and focused in one very sort of narrow niche of the market. So the people I reach is a smaller group than you can potentially reach, because you cover everything from automobiles to furniture to paintings to watches to prints and engravings, silver. I looked through all your videos, and it's quite a cache of them that you've set up there.
I don't mind. I'll talk about anything, Peter. I'm not precious at all.
And you started in the business very young.
I did. The interest started very young. From about the age of 5, I was fascinated by history originally. And I write history books now, but that's just a coincidence, I think. Yeah, so it was objects that I used to find objects or be given objects by relatives, worthless things, but with age. And I used to hold them and close my eyes and imagine that I was traveling back in time. And even now, today, seriously, I still believe that the closest you can ever get to traveling back in time is handling objects from the past, touching them, feeling them, looking at them, weighing them, even smelling them can take you back in time, and its connections to real people. So I discovered that these objects, these antiques, could teach me so much about history. And so the two are inextricably linked: history, stories, and objects. And so from the age of 5, it's almost embarrassing. I should have been doing much more exciting things. I was looking at history and things. And then from the age of about 18, I became a dealer in all sorts: cars, vintage cars, antique furniture, particularly in the beginning, anything and everything with a story and a past. That's what draws me in.
So it's the door that opens when you hold an object, and
exactly
you start to think about it, and you step into it. It's like the witch in the wardrobe. You know, you're going into the right.
In reality, that's exactly it. If you use your imagination, and my goodness me, I do, it really can take you places.
Yeah. Now, which is there a period in particular that you like, or is there an area that really is that you automatically look for when you're out running around the countryside in that old car?
Yeah.
Is there something that when you go into a shop, are you looking for something like on the top level right away always, and then other things that catch your eye?
Yeah, I think so. I think from being a very young man, my first love was the Georgian period. So that period, 1714 to 1830, which of course encompasses really interesting American history.
Sure,
the War of Independence and all of that. I love that period. And during that period, both in Britain and America, some fabulous pieces were made. And it was a real time of invention, the Industrial Revolution, fabulous stories from that time, and particularly the furniture from that period, the red walnuts and the deep mahoganies, the side tables and the card tables. And of course, those card tables tell great stories socially about, huge, copious amounts of alcohol consumption. They loved drinking and gambling away estates. And people think that, you know, the big gambling thing in the 18th century was only for the very rich. It wasn't. It was for the very poor as well. And they were all drinking and gambling. And they could walk into a tavern wearing clothes and walk out completely naked because they'd lost all
literally lost their shirts.
Literally lost their shirts. That time is, to me, fascinating. And my first book, the first book I wrote, called A Romp with the Georgians, was all about that time and funny stories that I'd learned over decades whilst handling antique objects.
Yeah, but and also in England, the 17th, 18th century, sort of after Charles II, England really expanded onto the world stage much more than it had during, obviously not during Cromwell's era, but afterwards. And the shipping, opening up ports through the marriage of Charles II to the daughter of King of Portugal, and that whole history, and then England, the East India Company, and these monstrous firm with their own army of 250,000 soldiers. And
well, bizarrely, the East India Company's army was actually bigger than the British standing army, and that was and they even had their own flag, the East India Company.
Right.
In fact, can I give a ruthless plug? My latest book here was only published on Friday. So this is a bash with the British Empire. And I write quite a lot about the East India Company, which were fascinating. I mean, that time of British expansion, when the British became the policemen of the world, was incredible. So this book is completely non-academic. It's just full of funny stories that people have never heard before from that period. 300-year period where Britain ruled the waves.
Right. Well, this was and of course it ended up with huge amounts of culture being brought back from every country that they went into. Sometimes they took it, sometimes they were given it, sometimes they bought it, they traded it.
We don't like to talk about that, Peter.
No. Well, I told you I did a video on the sacking of the Summer Palace. And
some very good things came out of that.
And in general, people liked it, but I have to admit, I got a couple of emails from folks over your way that were fans of Lord Elgin that weren't too pleased with it. But it was the first one I did was a big hit in China. I mean, we got about 70,000 views out of the video, out of Malaysia and Hong Kong.
Wow, that's brilliant! Breaking into the Oriental market, literally through YouTube. You're a winner.
You can't get through the firewall into mainland China. I would love to be able to do that, because we have people that watch in China on VPNs. They're using private networks, because I do hear from them periodically. But in general, we're blocked out, and I don't attack China. I don't get into their politics. I don't that would be the end if you did that. But I would rather have that access by talking about their art and the great things that have come from China and Asia in general. And it's the same with what you do with what the EIC brought back to England from all of their excursions. Everywhere, right? From the Bahamas to India to Australia,
literally all over the world. The sun never set on the British Empire. I mean, it was impossible for the sun to set. There's so many countries were brought into the fold.
Right.
So the biggest empire on the planet. And whatever people think about that empire, in a way, it's crazy to judge what empires were like centuries ago. You can't do it. If it wasn't for the British Empire, it would have been another empire. And that would probably have been a much more embryonic empire. So
you also have the skewing of history through the modern lens, that people would look at Britain's history or France's history or the U.S. history or anything, and they go back in time, and there's this revisionist way of looking at it based on mindsets today.
Doesn't work. It just doesn't make sense.
And you cannot do it. There was something I saw interesting lately. It was one of the Bill Maher or somebody, and he said, people today were talking about the slavery problem, the issue of slavery, and they were saying that if I were alive in the 1700s, I would have been against slavery. And he said, no, you wouldn't have been.
Yeah,
because it was the culture and things
normal.
that we look at today as being fairly abhorrent.
Yeah.
Certainly. Back then, that was life. That was, the word Slav comes from the Slavic people who were the first slaves. They weren't Africans, and that industry grew and remained for hundreds, thousands of years. It's just thousands of years, actually.
Well, really, even longer. The dawn of time. I think the second oldest profession in the world is that of a slave trader, because it's always been in existence. And it's funny because I mentioned it in the book. I touch on this, that you can't judge the past. History is a foreign country. They do things differently there, so you can't judge the past. But what will happen, the way that we're going, that in 50 years or 100 years, then people will look back upon this time and realize that there are currently, as we're speaking, 40 million people around the world living in slavery. Now, for me, I think it's much more important to do something about those people today than to argue about the past. Let's get on with the future.
Well, it's again that the modern lens. The modern lens, they give everybody in the modern day tend to get grace. It's okay. All the faults, the things that we've done and other people, and eventually it becomes part of our material culture, and then we can look back on it with a clearer eye. And I think it's the same with objects and art. There are certain forms of art when the Impressionists came in, they were considered to be heretics and horrible people, and they're ruining the art world. And of course now we know how that turned out.
Yeah.
The Cubist movement. When you look at furniture styles, Queen Anne highboys, by 1790, nobody in America really wanted them anymore because it was too tied to the old British system.
That's right.
So the Americans adopted furniture that was tied to sort of the Greek heritage, the Federal period furniture, different lines, different appearances. But at the time, it was considered to be sort of outrageous that you were gravitating away from Georgian and Chippendale and that sort of thing, and going into Federal furniture, and then Victorian furniture, which was, for years everybody thought Victorian furniture was junk.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And and now great rosewood Victorian furniture and Empire furniture and all that has a place in collections.
It's funny because people think that the world of antiques is a bit dusty and a bit stuffy and it doesn't change, but it changes like any other industry, doesn't it, Peter? And, fashions come and fashions go, and those that are stuck, in the past when it comes to the world of antiques, stop making money. You have to change with the times.
Well, I remember in the 90s when the modern furniture stuff came along, and everybody was Art Deco, modern, Klizmos chairs, all that sort of chic stuff that was made in the 20s and 30s. My wife's grandfather was very involved with that, and he was on the cutting edge because he started the Vanini glass company.
Oh, wow.
In Murano. His name was Paolo Vanini. And
hey, Peter, you know what? You married very well, didn't you?
I married up. Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing. My wife's mother's side of the family, the Vaninis, and we have a big family. One of her godfathers owns the Rotunda in Venice, the famous round building.
Yeah.
And the other cousins have the Palazzo Barbarossa in the Mazare, the palace at Mazare, the Palladian villa. And so that's her family, and related to old Doges of Venice and all that. And her mother's side of the family are all part of the Hancock family in Boston, direct descendants of John Hancock's sister. Who?
No wonder you're always smiling.
Yeah, so we had a lot of it up until a number of years ago. We kept some of it, and we kept a lot of the Vanini glass. We have a large amount of Vanini glass. in the house that were made by Paolo and made for Paolo in his home in Italy. So I punched away above my weight class. Yeah.
It must be your charm.
Well, I met her in the business. That's how I met my wife, was that she was working with another antique dealer.
Oh.
And she'd been living overseas, and she came back, and that's how we met.
Oh, my goodness me.
Yeah. So you don't have a shop. You work out of your house, and you do television. And is there an area of art that you're particularly interested in? Paintings, that sort of thing, or what's your?
Well, I also like painting. So about 10 years ago, I went through a classic midlife crisis where I was trying to discover something new, and I thought I was losing my youth, which I was. And I went a bit mad, and I started painting. I began dreaming about being an artist. And as a kid, I used to love painting, but my art teacher at school said to me when I delivered a project, he looked at it and it was a bit outrageous. And he said, "Harper, nobody in their right minds paints like you." And Peter, that put me off painting for quite some time. But about 10 years ago, I was dreaming I was an artist, and I started painting. And bizarrely, within a couple of years, I started selling my paintings. So that's part of now what I do. So I wear a lot of hats: BBC TV, antique consulting, dealing, classic cars, writing books, and painting. So I never sleep, but I enjoy what I do.
I can't draw a stick figure. This is it's
It doesn't matter. Peter, it doesn't matter. You know it doesn't matter. When it comes to art, you can get away with blue murder. It's all about what the viewer gets from it. And if you just sit yourself in, I'd love to see you do it. Sit in front of a canvas and just let yourself go. You unload your soul onto the canvas. It's very freeing. And see if anybody wants to buy it. I might be your first buyer.
Well,
it's a new career for you.
My grandmother was a painter, and my mother was a painter. I didn't. It's like porcelain and pottery. I tried. I took several classes. My wife is a very good potter, and I tried doing that. And I took the classes where she took classes, and as much as I know what a piece should look like, the fingers didn't transmit to the clay what I wanted to see. And,
you can start your own movement, the Peter Combs movement.
Yeah,
well, it's open, but who cares?
Yeah, I suppose. But I'm so critical of myself that I thought, oh, what a horrible mess that is, And back in the bucket, the clay went, and it started over, and it was fun. It was a nice people, and as I said, my wife is quite proficient at it. But she grew up. She was, as a kid, worked. She was in summers and stuff. Was at the Vanini factory. So she was around the production of objects, so to speak, the blowers and the workers and the people that did the cold work and all that sort of thing. So I think she had it more in her blood from an early age than I did.
So is this a joint passion for you then, you and your wife? Do you but share?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. She has certain things that she's very interested in, that I bring home. Some of the things that we've collected, she's not that interested in, but objects and great objects she spots instantly. She can tell a really good object from just some odd bit that I got somewhere, and she is interested in their history and where they came from. But she grew up with the stuff. She grew up with a lot of interesting material. She had two of her cousins who have since passed away, were well-known Venetian glass artists in their lifetimes, and her cousin Alessandro and her other cousin, they were siblings. They both died within a couple of years of each other, but they were exhibited. They're at the Biennale, and her name was De Santillana, and they were very successful. So she understands it. She understands shape, form, and color, and we have lots of reference material around the house, and vases and all kinds of interesting things, and other objects that belong to Chinese. Paolo Vanini loved Chinese art, So we have some Chinese pieces that he owned, that kind of thing, because he would copy their colors.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
you know, as Pablo Picasso said, a good artist borrows, a great artist steals. And it's the same in the world of antiques, isn't it? The Chinese copy the Japanese copy the Koreans,
Yep.
we copy the Chinese. It's all just shared designs of shape, color, and form.
And they morph into other things too in their careers as artists. So, but one of the fellows that worked at Venini early on was Scarpa, the famous architect who was very famous glass artist. But he started out doing glass before he became an architect. Mm-hmm. And then there was Massimo Vignelli, who started out in the glass workshop doing design, and he started Vignelli Design, which became the most influential design firm one of the most in the 20th century in New York. Yeah. And he designed things you see every day. He designed the logos and the designs for Bloomingdale's logos and all these sorts of things, packaging, clothing, you name it. They did work for him. But he started out very basically designing glass.
Yeah.
And then his art with his wife too was phenomenal, expanded. And I think that happens with artists a lot. They start over here and they finish over there.
And they take inspiration from anything and everything.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Things that they see in the world around them. Mm-hmm. And then they have revelations, and then new technology comes in, or they meet somebody. But that's Chippendale, Thomas Chippendale in England, when he wrote the famous book.
Yeah.
And look at the people he influenced from that book. Even though a lot of it was just Georgian stuff that was rehashed to some degree. George the Third, is it George the Third?
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Now, I think Thomas Chippendale was a very interesting character, because when most people hear of the name, they assume that he was from, a highfalutin, wealthy English family. He had a great education, very cultured, maybe did a grand tour of Europe. So far from the truth. He was a very ordinary man, basically a wood joiner, cabinet maker. Right. He was not far from where I am today, in actual fact, only about maybe an hour and 20-minute drive, a little town in West Yorkshire called Ockley. And Ockley was too small for him, so he moved to York. You've got New York, we've got the original York. He moved
I know
York.
You do, yeah.
Yeah, and it was too small for him, so he went to London, but he barely had any education. He just had a great talent, a great mind, lots of confidence, and he went to the big city, the biggest city in the world at the time, to explore this. But what Thomas Chippendale was, he was an interior designer, he was a decorator, he was a designer, a furniture maker, but more than anything else, he was the world's best salesman. He got on his horse and he took his manual, his basically mail order manual, director, and he knocked on all the big posh country houses and castles in Britain. So here in Britain, you can go to any number of country houses and find Thomas Chippendale pieces, because he was a great salesman. Remarkable story.
And what, he went around and pitched them on a design? Interiors.
He knocked on their doors. He flogged them furniture door to door, and he would post them out, which would take weeks to get from London to Scotland, his manuals. And he was so good at selling, Peter, he would upsell all the way. And even when a client died, he'd offer the family to make them a Thomas Chippendale coffin, which he did.
Really?
Remarkable.
I never knew that. No, were they ornate? Have you ever seen one?
No, I don't want to see one either.
Well, I mean,
they probably would have been, but Thomas Chippendale made furniture for the servants' quarters as well as the fine library. He was just a very good businessman, but like a lot of good businessmen and family firms, it's the founder who rolls his sleeves up, gets to work, makes the money, but his son, who took over the firm of Thomas Chippendale, bankrupted the company in about 1804, 1805, I think it was. And so the company only lasted about 50 years.
Really?
But it's the documentation. He was very good at keeping records, and all of these big country houses and castles have the records. And so I think it's, as you know, it's provenance. It's the records as well as everything else. So what am I hearing?
But he also, he did interior woodworking.
He did everything.
He did everything, and he inspired people to paint wallpaper. And
the guy never stopped. He used to import glass, mirror glass from France, make his own frames. He would sell paint. He was basically an interior decorator. He was no different to a big, well-known interior decorator today. And this is what people seem to get mixed up with history. History, living in the past, was very much like living now. He was just a really good designer and salesman, making money, making his way in life.
I knew that he did a lot with interiors, but I didn't know that that was really a heavy focus of what he was doing.
Big time. In fact, another ruthless plug, he's in my first book.
Oh.
A Romp with the Georgians. I write about the big three: Thomas Chippendale, Thomas Sheraton, and George Hepplewhite. The three big,
the dynamic trio.
But what I found fascinating when I researched these guys years ago, Peter, was just like Thomas Chippendale, the other two came from very ordinary backgrounds as well. They were just ordinary people, before the days of free education. They had no education. But that's what I love about the British system at the time. It was a meritocracy. So if you had talent, tenacity, guts, and a work ethic, you could go places. And the very wealthy families didn't mind that Thomas Chippendale had a deep Yorkshire accent. It didn't matter. He was just damned good, and they wanted his products. And that's how we built the empire, because it was a meritocracy. If you were good, you could go places.
And his stuff was all very sort of reflective of the exterior architecture of the period too, right?
And classical, again, inspired by the ancient Romans and the Greeks. Nothing is new in design. It's just stolen and rehashed.
And was it Hepplewhite or Sheraton's widow who actually was the one that sold his designs?
Very good. It was Hepplewhite.
It was Hepplewhite.
Yes,
right.
George Hepplewhite. There are no records of George Hepplewhite even existing, really. His wife, Alice, was the one that produced his book of 300 designs post Hepplewhite's death. And so now I need to look deeper into this, because I really believe that George Hepplewhite was actually a woman called Alice Hepplewhite. George probably existed, but there's no great records of him, certainly no furniture made by him. But during the 1780s, 90s in Britain or in America, it would have been impossible for a woman to produce a book of furniture designs and sell them all over the world to male cabinet makers. So she dressed it as, this is George Hepplewhite's.
It's my late husband's stuff, not mine.
And I love her. She made lots of money out of it, and good for her. I think there's a movie in it somewhere.
Well, that was sort of a thing. I always point over my shoulder, it seems, when you talk, but you see that painting up over my shoulder of the bird. Yes. Okay, yes. That was painted in about 1802 by a British woman painter named Sarah Stone.
Right.
And she was famous for painting birds, all kinds of exotic birds and countryside birds in England. But she had to give up painting when she got married because it was considered inappropriate.
That's right. Well, again, different times, Peter. You can't judge that today, can you? It's just the way it was.
Right. Yeah. And I saw that painting at an auction, and I looked up the artist because I had never heard of her. Yeah. And there was a great deal written about her. She was new to me when I got it. I've had the picture for 20 years, but I bought it. I decided to buy it, and it was fairly expensive just because of her unusual story, that she was an unbelievably accomplished painter, highly recognized, got married, never painted for money again.
Well, that's right. I mean, at the same time, if you were a female teacher, the moment you got married, you couldn't be a teacher. That was just the way the culture was at the time.
Well, it was that way when I was a kid.
Really? You're looking good for your years, Peter.
I was in the 4th grade, and my teacher got married, and she had to stop teaching. 3rd grade.
Never.
Mrs. Robbins, yeah.
Well, there you have it. You're living history. That's what you are.
That was only in the early 60s.
What, 1860s?
But and it was announced that she was getting married, and we lived near the school. She came over to say goodbye, and she said, "I'm moving to Connecticut." And I remember it well. And I went, I couldn't understand why she can't be a teacher anymore because she's married.
Well, we've moved on, haven't we? We've moved on rapidly.
Yeah. Well, I think it was like being a nun back then. I think sort of, that kind of thing. So what else do you put up to?
Well, apart from filming, I'm about to start the new Antiques Road trip. So this is where we drive around in our classic cars. And I'm very much looking forward to that because it is very easy. I find it very easy because all I have to do is turn up at a location. So the BBC give me a postcode to a hotel. I don't even know where it is. I just pitch up, I go to bed. The following morning, they give me a classic car and they tell me to drive to a certain location, go into a shop which I've never seen before. I'm not allowed to know where it is, and just talk about antiques. And I know this might sound a bit odd, but it's very easy. So it takes all the pressure away. Once I've done that, they take me back to the hotel, they feed me, put me to bed, and I get up the next day and do the same again. I don't have to think. It's wonderful. So I'm very much looking forward to it. And
they have a good fleet of cars to share?
Oh, yeah. Another if ever you've seen the show, if you haven't seen it, you'll be able to find it on YouTube, the Antiques Road Trip. Okay. The cars, I promise you, look a lot better on screen than they are in reality. Oh, so last year, I was driving, we're right-hand drive, of course. So I was in the passenger seat on the left-hand side of a Triumph convertible from the early 60s. And every time the driver, my companion, went round a roundabout to the right, the passenger door would fling open and I would almost fly out.
Really?
So these bits are cut, right? The danger bits are cut from the production, but the cars are just old cars, but they look so much better on camera than they are.
So these are like old TR3s or something? Or?
Things like that. We've had TR3s, E-Type Jaguars, all sorts. I've had Lamborghinis, Aston Martins, but it's like photographs. When you photograph something, it always looks better than it is in reality. And it's the same with the cars. But luckily, I enjoy the old cars. They're full of character.
And they smell like burning oil half the time. And
wonderful. I'd wear it as aftershave if I could.
Nectar. Blue smoke. Woo!
Happy days.
Yeah. And how long will you be going about doing that?
I'll do that off and on for about 3 months for one series. And then in the summer, we do the celebrity versions, which are, let me tell you, fascinating, because it's not just me and another dealer or auctioneer. It'll be me and a celebrity that I've never met before. It can be a politician, it could be an actor, a pop star. Just get a celebrity. And it's bizarre because when I meet them, within 20 minutes, we're in a classic car together, microphoned up, cameras all over the place, having a conversation. And so it's getting to know a celebrity on fast forward, and they capture the whole conversation. And it's bizarre because a lot of the celebrities kind of unload. It's like they're in a therapy session. It's fabulous. It's like you're driving and they're telling you stuff. You're thinking, should you really be telling me that? It's pouring out of them. And I love the celebrity shows.
Yeah. And so they're sort of more relaxed because they're in a different environment. They're not on, so to speak. They're sort of just out there doing something that they enjoy.
You know what? You've nailed it. That's exactly what they all say. They say this is so relaxing because I don't have to be anybody apart from myself. So they're not acting, they're not performing, they're just them having a little trip around the British countryside, buying antiques with me. And it's I can't begin to explain what it's like. It's an experience that I don't get in any other time. Even if I went to a party and it's full of celebrities, it's not the same. There's a veneer there, like a protective veneer. But when we're filming in these little cars, conversations open up. And it's absolutely fascinating. I've made some really good friends, actually. And you must have met lots of well-known people and sold to them. But the common denominator is they're all incredibly normal. They're just normal people.
Yeah, I think that's quite accurate. We over the years have met and dealt with quite a number of them. And once they're sort of on what you're doing and what you're talking about, it's a passion or an interest of theirs, what they do with the rest of their time disappears because they've now left that world and they're now doing something that's personal. And and that sort of brings out the best in everybody, I think, you know, or the worst, you know, because sometimes.
Oh yeah, that can happen. I've had a few experiences in that department.
But over the years, we've had the same sort of things where someone will call out of the blue for something, you know, and we talked about it in the other video. We had a number of them, and that's fine, and that's fine. And then you finish that up, and then they go back and edit it all and get it all organized, and then what?
Well, I do a lot of talks. So yesterday I was in the northwest of England in a little place called Lytham St Anne's in a beautiful Georgian house called Lytham Hall. So built in the mid 18th century, and I was doing my Georgian talk. So it's like an afternoon tea, 100 people. They'll eat scones and cream and copious amounts of tea, all terribly English. And then I'll give a talk about Georgian life. And it's just funny stories. It's just me repeating real things that happened long ago that people cannot believe, but they're all true. And in a wonderful environment. So yeah, so I've got lots of those. I sell the books, I do my talks, and then I move on. And I love those because it's instant reaction with people. And the talks are never scripted. The idea of doing like an hour talk with a script and reading from a paper fills me with horror. I couldn't be bothered. So I have no idea what I'm going to say. I just go out and I ask them to ask me questions. And they'll say, how did people go to the toilet? What foods did they eat? What was the average wage? How long did they live? What did they die of? What was medicine like? What was it like being in the army? They just ask questions, and then I feed off that. And I love it. It's like you're on a tenterhook because you don't know what's coming. And if they ask you a question and I don't know the answer, I quite like it because I try to wriggle. It's like trying to get out of a paperback. It's like wriggle my way around and bring the topic onto something I do know about. So it's a bit of a thrill. I love it.
Do you shatter myths while you're doing this? Like
yeah. And I think particularly about the Georgian period and the empire, and people hear stories of, you know, Lord Nelson, of the Battle of Trafalgar, a great British naval officer who's terribly famous in his time and famous now. And most people think because he's called Lord Horatio Nelson that he was an aristocrat. Well, he wasn't. He went to sea at the age of 12. You know, he barely had any education. His education was at sea, fighting. He loved fighting and he was very good at it. And the British Royal Navy saw great talent and they kept elevating him, promoting him.
Didn't he get severely wounded and he left the military and then they brought him back at one point?
He was always getting severely wounded. Lord Nelson seemed to love getting severely wounded.
He lost an arm?
He lost an arm, he lost an eye. This is where we get the term, you know, to turn a blind eye. You know, when you say turn a blind eye to something, it's from Lord Nelson. And you can date it to the Battle of Copenhagen, 1801, when Lord Nelson was fighting the Danes in the harbour. He was having a great time fighting away with his patchy eye. And his commanding officer, who was a mile out to sea, was looking through his telescope into the harbour. And he could see that Nelson was completely outgunned and was going to be completely massacred. So he sent a flag signal in to get Nelson out. He ordered him out of the harbour, you're going to be massacred. And Nelson's lieutenant told him about this flag order to get out. And Nelson, because he was doing what he loved doing, fighting, didn't want to leave the battle. So he said to his lieutenant, give me that telescope. I want to read these flag signals for myself. And he put the telescope to his blind eye, twizzled it, and said, I see no such signal, continue fighting. And he won the day.
And that's where that came from.
Turn a blind eye. Lord Nelson, 1801, Battle of Copenhagen.
There's a trivia question that you could win money with.
It's a good one. Yeah.
Pick a bar bet, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you spend a lot of time thinking about, you like military history then?
No, I just like history. And
you just like history in general?
I love history, and I love characters from history. And once you scratch the surface of these characters, they have great stories to tell from the past that nobody seems to know. Certainly, when I was at school, I loved history. but I was taught about kings and queens and dates and battles. And I had to, it's like, it was an overload of information I wasn't particularly interested in. I liked the real human stories that I started discovering when handling and researching antiques. And this is what the books are full of, just real stories that nobody's ever heard before. So yeah, that's really, I do a lot of those. And I think I prefer doing them than anything else.
I'll tell you, there's a quick story. I think you'll get a kick out of this if you like this. We had an auction one time and we got a bunch of Civil War material. And
Your
included
Civil
this,
War or my Civil War?
Our Civil War, our Civil War, the North and the South in the 1860s.
Yeah.
And one of the pieces came with was a diary from a man that was a crewman on one of the ironclads down in Washington. Very dangerous, unbelievably dangerous. And in his diary, through his whole time that he's on the Monitor, I think it was the Monitor, he's writing how awful it is. The smell. There are no toilets. They're locked in this metal can in the sun, roasting. They only can open the doors so many times a day to let fresh air in. They have to cook in there with the smoke. It's awful. It's hell. And he complains bitterly about it the whole time. And then as the diary progresses, his service time is up. He was from Connecticut. And he says, on this day, I'm on my way by train back north, and I'm back to the warm bosom of my family to see my loving children and my mother and all this. And you think, oh, this is it. He made it home. He's in great shape. And that's the end of the diary. And then you flip over, and it's dated about 3 months later. And he writes in his entry is, and on this day, he said, memory of home life is often more than it actually was. And that on this day, I have re-enlisted and we're rejoining my
back to the ironclads,
rejoining my crewmates on the boat back in the Potomac River. Yeah, and he was on the train heading back south. He was home for 3 months, didn't work.
You see, the wife was probably very used to him not being there and getting on with her life and having a jolly good time.
Yeah, I think so. And the diary sold for a great deal of money.
Well, there you go. You see, that's touching the life of a real person long gone and bringing him back to life. And that's what
but it was much more than that. But that was sort of the punchline from the story. Yeah. But he wrote about the difficulties, the dangers of weapons, the steel ship explosions, the cannonballs hitting the boat while they're in it at night, and they're exploding outside, and
can you imagine
all this terror, and but not as terrifying as being back in Greenwich, Connecticut, I guess,
with the missus.
Yeah.
That's the glory of history. It just brings things back to life. And when you read stories like that, and in the book, the things I write, you couldn't really make them up. And if you did, and you put them into a movie, people would think that's a terrible story because it just is so unlikely.
Right.
But the most unlikely things actually happen in real life, and it's fascinating reading about them.
Well, the Revolutionary War here, like all wars,
we don't like to talk about that, Peter.
Yeah, I know. Well, but there were all these lots of side stories, especially for people from Massachusetts, because so many were involved. It started here. It started in Concord, Lexington, and the famous painting of Washington crossing the Potomac with the people paddling the boat, and he's standing up. Well, all the crew of that boat were from my hometown.
Really?
They were sailors from the town of Marblehead. Wow. And because they were known to be such able boatmen in their day, that he said, if I'm going to cross in this ice and risk my life, I want the guys from Marblehead to be paddling the boat. And
that's magic to me. Little tales like that bring the stories to life.
Yeah.
And these are the stories that history teachers don't tell kids today. That little nugget of information would spark the interest of a 7-year-old. And once you do that, then they have a lifetime of interest in history. Just that little side story is brilliant.
Yeah, and that was a sort of thing. When I was a kid, we would hear these stories about the people that lived in the town we lived in. Yeah. And there's that famous painting of that was done for the centennial of the drummer, the fluter marching with the flag, that giant American painting. Well, that hangs in the city hall, the town hall where I grew up, the original. and and one of the man with the drum on the end, I think it is the son of the artist who modeled for the painting. Yeah, yeah.
Great history. No, you do live in a part of America that is so packed with fascinating history. Actually, New England, of course, you know, from the very early days of the Puritans leaving old England and want to start a new life over there. So
and there's a lot of myths, you know, they're untrue.
Yeah.
You know, Marblehead as a town when it first started was a pretty rough place, as compared to Salem, which was polite society. Marblehead was not polite.
They started burning witches, that is.
That was this was after they burned.
That's right.
Killed some witches. They only killed about 20 of them.
That's all right. That's okay.
They make it sound like they were executing them day and night, like the Holocaust, but they charged 2,000 people with being witches, and they executed 20 of them.
Oh, it's not bad.
See, so you know, well, in Europe, in France, they killed thousands.
Oh, well, of course.
You know, in Germany, they tortured them before they killed them.
Yeah, exactly.
You know. Did England have that problem?
Oh yes, absolutely. In the 17th century.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
But of course, it was a way of, you know, it's a bit like, you know, if you have an argument with the woman I live in a village in the north of England, and I suppose people have been living in this village for 2,000 years. I would guess it goes back to the Roman time.
The Romans, yeah.
Yeah. The Romans had a river crossing here, just 500 feet away. But I suppose if you had a fallout with another woman in the village, you just accuse her of being a witch, and it would be up to her to prove that she wasn't a witch, not necessarily up to you to prove that she was. So it's a very dangerous time to be having a fallout with your girlfriends in the 17th century.
So it's a rough way to get a divorce.
Whoa.
And what do they just flee? They would just leave town, I would assume.
Well, but would they? Because people didn't travel very much in those days. About the roads and, you know, the dangers, and often people, same with America at the same time, they rarely left their villages or hometown, certainly their home county. So where could they go, and how could they restart again? They'd have to try and brave it out and hope that they were found innocent, I suppose.
You hope it blows over.
Yeah, which it probably did most of the time, but rough going if you were found guilty.
Yeah. Well, now, was that during Cromwell's time or before? That was before Cromwell. Charles I, right?
Yeah, well, Charles, so that's like 1640s, 1650s. You know, it was that time, at the same time in Salem and all of that. So
yeah, okay.
The 17th century was, in fact, I was thinking about another book. So I've written about the Georgians and then the empire right up into the later part of the 20th century. I quite fancy writing about the 17th century and titling it How to Burn a Witch. I know it's a comedy. It's a comedy book.
You'll have every women's group in England after you for that, you know. So it was sort of in the transition period then from Charles I to Cromwell in that overlapping years. Yeah,
very tricky years those, of course, here, because of course Cromwell banned Christmas for, you know, about 10 years, so we couldn't celebrate Christmas. In fact, I was filming recently in a very old house in a town only 3 miles from where I live called Barnard Castle. So it's literally a castle, it's a Norman castle, and the town was built around it. And there's an old manor house in the middle of the town. It's a restaurant now, and we were filming there. And it was quite interesting because 500 years ago, the house was still there. And it was at Christmas time. And, you know, we were talking about Cromwell. And the house has been there for 500 years, but in the 1650s, Cromwell banned Christmas. So in that very house, there was about 10 Christmases out of its 500 Christmases it couldn't celebrate. And Cromwell had troops on the streets making sure that nobody was having a good time. You weren't allowed to drink. He forced all the shops to open so nobody would celebrate. And if you were caught walking through the town with a turkey or food stuff that might be related to Christmas, you were arrested. So it was like the happy police were out. They barred all celebrations. Thank God it only lasted 10 years.
So they took it to a real extreme.
Yeah, and of course, then he was a Puritan, and then they jumped on a boat and went to America.
Right. Right. And then
Them.
they skipped town and came here and made a mess. Started attacking the Indians. Well, there's a lot of that. I actually have a book that was published in 1715, and it's a written account of the history as it was handed down at that point from the Puritans and the interactions with the Native Americans and some of it actually it was quite amazing what the relationships they had with the indigenous people here, and then there were times when it didn't go so well too. So from either side, the Indians attacked just as happily as some of the Pilgrims did.
Yeah, of course.
So it was a real fiasco. But again, part of the good history from around here, and you have the same thing over there. So
well, it's wonderful when you're surrounded by history. You can just take a walk and immerse yourself in history. And there's always something new. We talked about this about antiques. You need 1,000 lifetimes to know it all with antiques. Similarly with history, you just pick a new era, 17th century, the Roman period, whatever. There's so much to learn, and it's so stimulating. It kind of tickles the brain.
Well, yeah, but all the material culture is just representation of the period. It's a physical manifestation of what filled their world. So you if you know the objects and then you know the history, you can very readily picture the environment that they were living in.
That's right, and that's lovely to do that. It's amazing to do that.
And then it's a whole other thing, because it now has enormous meaning. If you have a table where certain things took place in history, and they were done at that table or done at that chest, or
absolutely, and you're touching the same thing that those people touch. So that again, I feel like a 5-year-old every time I think about it. It sends shivers up the back of my spine. So it'll never stop getting me, I don't think.
Well, let's hope not. You have a busy couple of months coming up.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to try and get some sleep.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. This has been fun.
Thank you.
And I think we've covered everything as much as I think we could probably go on for a couple of hours. Pretty comfortably.
I think we're going to bore everybody to death. I think it's probably time to.
We'll try not to. Yeah. Put some music in this. All right. So this has been David Harper, and if you are looking for a great channel to subscribe to for antiques and art, and want to see a lot of the English countryside and what a shop looks like over in England, and how they take stuff in for auction, and you work with a Stoll, right? The auction house, or
yes,
the friends of yours?
I work closely with one auction in particular. I work with several, but one, David Elstob, is a good pal of mine. And,
yeah,
we've been developing game shows and that kind of thing. He's a great guy, and he does a really good job. So it's a perfect partnership. Yeah.
Well, they have a substantial auction house. They have a substantial business.
He's done very well. But again, he works very hard. And I love people that, have great tenacity and guts. He put everything on the line, and it's worked for him. And he works very hard at it, and he deserves the success. Yeah. So it's good to be partnered with people who are just very good at their job. And so that's highly important.
Right. And he's near you.
Yes, only about 40 minutes away. He's in North Yorkshire. I'm in the county of Durham. So
right. Just down. So it's just down the road.
Down the road.
Cup of coffee.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, David, it's been great. I hope we do this again and see if we can figure out something else to talk about sometime. And in the meantime, you have a great rest of your day.
Well, thank you, Peter. Real delight to see you. Thank you very much.
Always good. Bye-bye.